everybody, welcome back to another episode of Tac Intel Tuesday. I'm your host, Mike Shelby. It's my favorite part of the week. I get to jump on this video and teach you about tactical intelligence, specifically how to improve your intelligence and security heading into the gray zone, into the years and decades ahead where things will become much more turbulent. On today's episode, I'm going to be telling you about my time at the big house working at the interrogation facility, the joint interrogation facility in Bagram, Afghanistan. That was my very first deployment. I'll give you an unclass look into what a typical day was there and the intelligence activities we did. I split time between the joint interrogation facility, also known as the Bagram Theater Internment Facility. I split time between Bagram and Fob Ghazni, and I'll talk more about that as well. Now, this is a unique episode for two reasons. Number one, as you can tell, I'm on the road. I have to go out of town. And next time I do this, I will have a microphone, so I apologize for the background noise. If it sounds like I'm driving down the Oregon Trail, I'm just in Louisiana. And the second reason is because I'm going to be telling you about my personal experiences, kind of off the cuff. I don't have any prepared material for you this week, but I will be back in the office next week, and we'll have something prepared for you. Now, I enlisted in 2004, and I went to MEPS, and I was actually permanently disqualified from service the first time I went to MEPS because I had a knee surgery when I was in high school. And so I had to jump through all these hoops, and I had to beg my surgeon to write me this letter, and he eventually did. And so I went back to MEPS with this letter from my doctor, and they said, okay, well, if your surgeon says you're good to go, I guess you're good to go. And they finally let me enlist. So I enlisted in 2004, and when I went to MEPS, I scored so highly on the ASVAB, and by the way, I'm not trying to brag, but I scored so highly on the ASVAB, they said, you can pick any MOS that you want. And we're talking about the Army here, so, this is not rocket science, okay? So my first choice, I said, okay, I want to go into counterintelligence. That sounds really cool. And so I asked the guy, that he was an Army civilian sitting behind the desk, and I said, well, what is this counterintelligence thing? And he's like, oh, yeah, man, that's like James Bond. And I was like, that's cool, dude. I want to do that. And he said, okay, well, we don't have any slots open right now. You're going to have to come back in like a month or something like that. And I was like, dude, I've already gone through this. The doctor's already looked at my butthole. I'm not coming back to MEPS and doing this again. I want to ship out today. So what else do you have? And he said, well, we have a thing called 96 Bravo, which is an all-source intelligence analyst. And I said, okay, that's still intelligence. That sounds cool. What is that? And he's like, yeah, man, that's like James Bond too. And I said, hey, great, sign me up. Well, it was not anything like James Bond, obviously. But that's the MOS that I chose. And being an all-source intelligence analyst meant that we received training and that we were essentially qualified to do analysis on multidiscipline intelligence. So we could do analysis on human intelligence or signals intelligence, open source, imagery, MASN, if you got in that particular unit or you're assigned that particular mission, and just pretty much any source of intelligence, any discipline of intelligence. And so my first tour, I was with a human intelligence company. So I was doing the analysis side, and we wound up at deploying to the joint interrogation facility in Bagram, aka the Big House. And just to be clear, I was not an interrogator. The Army has very strict rules about who can do interrogation. You actually have to be a HUMINTer or a counterintelligence agent. You have to be a graduate of one of the HUMINT or CI schools to do interrogation, or you have to go through the strategic debriefing course or whatever Army school that actually qualifies you to do interrogation. I'll get that out of the way. One thing that I did that was not interrogation was screening. And we'll talk more about that, but I do want to bring that up so I remember. Now, being on the analysis side, my job was to figure out who these detainees were, who these subjects were. And so we'd have dudes come in, and they would say, hey, my name is Mohammed. I'm a poor dirt farmer. And the big question is, okay, was this actually a dirt farmer? Or is this an IED builder? Or is this some senior level Taliban commander? Or any member of the Taliban or some other insurgent group at any level? And, well, that's a problem of analysis. That's something that really only an analyst can figure out. And so there's a lot of kind of detective work that is done. And so we'd have a detainee come in, SOTIF or some SF ODA would drop off one of their detainees at the back gate and bring them in. Or lots of conventional Army units or Marine units would bring in detainees as well. And so one of the first things I did whenever we got detainees in, we would have to go screen them. And screening is a form of human intelligence. And so it is direct questioning, and really you're trying to determine a couple things. Number one, or really a few things. Number one is basic biographical data. So like name, date of birth, et cetera, et cetera. There's a whole bunch of stuff on a screening sheet, and it is unclassified until it's filled out. And so that's one of the reasons why I can kind of tell you what gets asked. And I'm looking for enough information that I can go ahead and start figuring out or trying to figure out exactly who this guy is. Okay, he's Mohammed. He says he's a poor dirt farmer. Maybe that's right. Maybe that's wrong. Maybe he's actually some person who's very important. We don't know. And so I would conduct the screening and, kind of go through all these questions. I would look for indicators of deception if, I thought the detainee was not being truthful or he exhibited certain behaviors or mannerisms or body language or even kind of vocal intonation, then that's the first thing that I'd really write down. It's like, okay, this guy's being pretty sketchy about this question, and this is an area that really needs to be looked at further. Now, beyond that, I'm looking at a couple of things. Number one is threat level. So is this guy a threat? If this guy gets released, there's a thing called a detainee review board. And before a detainee gets released, he goes through the DRB, and you've basically got to say, like, hey, this guy got rolled up. He's the wrong place, wrong time. He really is a poor dirt farmer, and he just needs to be released. Or, hey, this guy still has intelligence value that needs to be exploited. He knows about so-and-so. He knows some HVT. He's linked to some HVT. Or this guy's like a threat. If we release him, he's going to go back to building bombs, or he's going to go back to shooting Americans or whatever. And then the second thing is intelligence value. So threat level and intelligence value. I mean, just broadly speaking, intelligence value is low, medium, or high. So if someone has low intelligence value, then there's maybe not much more intelligence he can give. Or if he has high intelligence level, then there's still a lot of stuff that can be explored. Lots of areas, known associates, whatever this guy can give us. Now, the interesting thing about the detainees who made their way up to the big house, the BTIF, is they've already spent some amount of time at a field detention site. And that's where I worked when I went down to Fob Ghazni. And a field detention site really is meant to be like a temporary kind of holding facility. There is, you can call it tactical interrogation, much closer to the actual date of capture. And this is when the information is still fresh. This is when you have the highest amount of intelligence value, because this person can tell you about very recent stuff. After a few days, or in some cases a week or longer, the detainee gets back to the BTIF, back to the big house for long-term exploitation. And, we say intelligence has a shelf life. That intelligence decays, sometimes by the minute. The actionability of that intelligence decays by the minute, by the hour, by the day, by the week, until at a certain point, just someone is exhausted of intelligence value, because anything they can tell you is only historic value. I mean, there's nothing there that is actionable. There's nothing there that's going to help us go find more bad guys. There's nothing there that's going to help us better understand the battle space, or better understand the composition or disposition or other features of the Taliban or whatever insurgent group. And so this was all kind of, we tried to discover all this during the screening process. Now, after a detainee gets screened, then they're assigned to an interrogator. You basically have this screening sheet, and you go meet with the interrogator, and we sit down and we say, all right, here, one of the analyst jobs is to sit down and say, hey, I think this guy is connected to this guy, or this guy is a part of an IED cell or a direct action cell, or he is XYZ, whatever he is. And then you work on a collection plan with the interrogator and say, hey, we need to explore these areas. This guy can link us back to this high value target. This guy can do X, Y, or Z, that kind of stuff. I wouldn't say it's necessarily the benefit, but not being a human mentor, not being a human intelligence collector, one of the benefits of working there is that I learned a ton about human intelligence collection. So much so that I can teach a lot of the stuff that I learned there because it makes sense, and because I've used it in everyday life. I've used it to talk to people. I've used it to, there's videos of me back in the 2016, 17, 18, 19, talking with Antifa, using elicitation, using questioning techniques, using approaches to get them to share with me information. And those are all up on YouTube and previous podcasts. My first true mentor was a dude named Brian, and he was an interrogator. He worked most of his Army career at the 5th Special Forces Group. He got out of the Army, and then he became a contractor. And so I got to work very closely with him, and he would teach me that one of the things was getting to watch the interrogation. And, if there's a time when an interrogator has a question, then he can basically say, hey, I have to go talk to my supervisor, about this. And really what he's doing is he's talking to the analyst. He's talking to me and saying, hey, this guy mentioned this name. It's not in our collection plan. You know who this is. And so, this is something that I might know offhand because we were assigned regional command areas. So, really part of our job was to understand all the intelligence requirements and try to answer those and understand the kind of Taliban units or the Taliban cells in this area. Who's the provincial commander, the district commander, or who's the most influential Taliban member here? Because really the Taliban, they kind of had this hierarchical command structure, kind of, but really it was pretty distinct because at times they're even like competing levels of command where, some direct cell or some ID cell might actually answer to two different commanders. And so that's another part of the job that really made understanding the Taliban command structure a little more complex, which means that if you're trying to target one of these Taliban commanders to take out a node or take out a facilitator, or take out a financier, or take out a whoever, then, there may be redundancy there. So if you take out one, it may not heavily disrupt Taliban operations in that area. At any rate, so I was assigned to a particular regional command, and so I would get detainees from this regional command area. And so at any rate, I got to work with Brian, and he would show me things, and we talked to me about kind of the nuances of body language and reading body language and using questions. And actually, one of my favorite questions to ask during screening was what's called a presumptive question. And that is a question that you ask and you already presume to know the first answer. So, for instance, I would not ask during the screening, I would not ask if a detainee was in the Taliban. I would ask, how long have you been in the Taliban? And when they stopped and just paused to think about when they first linked up with the Taliban, and they say, oh, no, I'm not in the Taliban. Well, you know they're in the Taliban. They were just thinking about how long they've been in the Taliban, and then they told you that they weren't in the Taliban. That is a presumptive question, and that's one of those, I don't know, it's a cool technique to even use just in business and negotiations. Talk about that during the interview process with employees, talk about that with, whoever. And there's all sorts of questioning types, and we can get into those maybe in a future episode here. So there was a detainee, got dropped off at the back gate. You go down there, maybe talk to the unit, talk to the ODA who dropped him off, and you get the circumstances of capture. Like, this guy was captured after a firefight. This guy was captured for X, Y, or Z reason, or X, Y, or Z circumstance, and you'd go through the pocket litter. So if this guy had any receipts, or there was one time a guy had like a little phone book kind of thing, like a little address book, like those little tiny ones. and it had a bunch of numbers in there. And so I was flipping through it, and it looked like mostly kind of Afghanistan numbers. But then I saw +1202, and I was like, +1202, that's in the United States. That's in Washington, D.C. I know that. And so we had this FBI liaison, so I ran up there and gave him that. And I was like, hey, dude, this guy's got a D.C. number in his phone book. You might want to track that down there. And I don't know whatever happened. They gave me like a little patch and a coin and some BS. So I don't even know what happened there, but kind of an interesting story. At any rate, you'd go through the pocket litter or anything this guy had on him. They would get like rolled up with like sticks and stuff, and they're like toothbrushes. They would have these little sticks and they'd chew on them and kind of use those. You know how almost like a rope that frays at the end, that after they would chew on the stick and it would kind of fray on the end and almost resemble like a toothbrush. Just some really weird stuff some of these guys came in with it. But, obviously cell phones. So all the cell phones are ripped. Laptops, any electronic devices are ripped just straight off the bat. All that data pulled off of there. And so we could go through that and kind of help piece together who these people were, what kind of information they came in. We got a lot of dudes known as hawalas. And a hawala is a Pashtun, kind of like money courier, kind of like money service exchanger. And so the hawala would basically would hold on to this money, kind of like a bank, but it's just a single dude. And so, lots of like ledgers and stuff would come in. And so that would go to like threat finance. And there's all, basically whatever equipment came in would get kind of doled off to its DocX or Domex or whoever was exploiting this stuff. Photographs, that was another big one. So, a guy comes in and he's got photographs on an electronic device, or he's got like literal photographs. And we would take those and put those, it's called a PID book, a positive identification book. And, we would ask these detainees like, hey, who is this dude? And who is this dude? Okay, who is this dude? And then we could cross-reference that off of other detainees as well. For instance, if we knew that this guy's name was Mohammed Abdullah, and we asked a detainee, this is kind of called a control question. And a control question is when you already know the answer to a particular question, and you're asking this question to someone, and you can judge their truthfulness based on their response. So if we know this picture is of a dude named Mohammed Abdullah, and we go to this detainee and we say, hey, who is this dude? And he says, oh, yeah, I know that dude. He's from my village. His name is Mohammed, whatever, Mohammed Akhundzada, whatever. And we know that's definitely not Mohammed Akhundzada. Then we could say, okay, well, this guy obviously is lying to us. And now we have reason to doubt everything he's told us, or maybe doubt previous things that he's told us. So that's called a control question. Also very, very useful questioning technique. So at any rate, there were all sorts of intelligence databases that we would use. So doing a name search, and there's all sorts of stuff, all sorts of ways that you can get this information. But, one of the ways that I try to figure out who these guys were is by looking up if there's any previous reporting on these guys. If there are any, previous threat reports or other detainees talking about this guy. Or, they came up in signals intercepts, or they came up in CIA reports, or they came up in whatever, wherever. And, I would grab that and say, well, this may be this guy, or, this guy might, based on the circumstances of capture, based on where this guy was pucked. That's PUC, persons under U.S. control. Kind of fell out of favor. I don't really care. It's a non-PC term. It's not politically correct. And so basically where this guy was pucked, he's maybe try to associate him with that local Taliban unit or Taliban cell there. And that would allow me and the interrogator to ask questions or to explore certain areas where this guy would actually have knowledge. So there was, you're looking for two things here. It's called placement and access. So basically, if this guy's from Ghazni province, then yeah, you're going to ask him about Taliban fighters in Ghazni province. You're not going to ask him about what's going on down in Kandahar, what's going on up in Mazar-e Sharif. He doesn't know. He's some dirt farmer from Ghazni. Ask him about stuff in Ghazni. That's the stuff that he knows. By the way, I saw this really funny meme the other day, and it's from that movie Kingdom of, I don't know, whatever, the Middle Ages movie about the Crusades. King Baldwin, the guy, he's got the metal mask because he's a leper or whatever. And, he's like looking down and he's putting his hand up and basically telling someone to, be quiet or whatever. And it says, be quiet, guy who has a political analysis degree from some prestigious Western university. A third world cab driver is talking. Which, literally, like, hey, if you want the ground truth on it in an area, I'm not going to ask some Harvard graduate. I want to talk to that cab driver. I want to talk to the guy who actually has on-the-ground real-world experience, who speaks the language, knows the culture, knows the political and social and economic conditions in that country. That's exactly who I want to be talking to. I want to get a primary source on that stuff. I want someone with direct first-hand access to that information, not whatever came through the lenses at Harvard, at any rate. So, I'm looking for this information and really trying to get down to the bottom of who this guy is and what he knows, and then work with the interrogator to work on some approaches or work on some tactics to, try to get this guy to talk, because, surprise, these people are very reluctant to give up information about their friends, about their comrades or family members or, other Taliban members. The average day, you might get assigned, 2, 3, 4 interrogations or something like that. And, have to build collection plans and review, okay, this is, here's what this guy talked about in the last interrogation. And so, he's talking about this, he's not talking about that. He says he doesn't know anything about this. Well, is this actually true? Let's go back and let's see, hey, does he actually not know anything about this? Et cetera, et cetera. You get the picture. And that was pretty much like an average day. It was it was not a dangerous deployment, but it was a critical deployment because, obviously you have Taliban fighters who can help us better understand the network. And then the more we understand about the network, the more we can do about it. The more we can provide information to targeting. We can build targeting packages based off what comes out of interrogations. We can pass that on to SOTIF. We can pass that on to whatever unit is in that district or at that FOB or in that province or whatever. Pass it on to the regional command, and they can continue to build a targeting package on this guy from there. In June 2006, on June 11th, 2006, a friend of mine and a guy in the Human Company was killed by an IED right outside of FOB Ghazni in Afghanistan. And he would email us and say, I'm going to die down here. He was convinced of that. And at the time, Ghazni was getting mortared and rocketed very routinely, pretty much like every day, every night. And he was on QRF, quick reaction force. And so basically what happens is, you have this area outside of FOB, and if troops get in what's called a tick, or troops in contact, basically a firefight, if they receive fire or they get into a gun battle with the Taliban, then you might have this QRF spin up and leave, quick reaction force to come out and basically provide reinforcements to that battle or help, basically recover Humvees that have been struck by an IED, or, grab everyone up who's in that tick and, bring them back to base or whatever. He was on QRF one day, and his Humvee struck an IED, and I'm sure they figured it out. Last I heard, I don't know if he was killed by the IED, but it was a complex attack. So after the gun truck struck an IED, they got out of the vehicle, and then they came under PKM fire, like machine gun, heavy weapons fire, or maybe it was a Dishka, or maybe it's both. And so the complex attacks were some of the most brutal in both Iraq and Afghanistan, because it's not just hitting the ID. It's not just the ID strike. It's the secondary attack that follows after it. And the Taliban got very, very good at secondary attacks and these complex attacks. And or dropping mortar. Okay, so it's not just heavy weapons fire. After a truck strikes an IED, soldiers dismount, and now they're dropping mortars on them, or using direct fire or precision small arms fire, based like sniper fire. Just some really, really tough situations. So at any rate, he unfortunately died, and he was killed in action. And like a week later, me and my section sergeant at the time, Smith, we went out to Fob Ghazni to help out. To kind of, there's a field detention site, an FDS down there, and Bernard was the interrogator down there, and so we went down there to kind of catch up, to provide some training, and get that FDS back up and running. When I was down there, we would get like mortared and rocketed every day, and it was always at like 2 or 3 a.m. or it happened at like 5 or 6 p.m. when everyone was in line to get chow. And so a lot of the stuff was just kind of harassing attacks. And so it was really just at the most inopportune times. And when I first got down there, we were sleeping in like these old Soviet bunkers, because they just came in and they built a fob around this old Soviet base right outside of Ghazni City. And there were dudes sleeping in their body armor. And I tried it. It was just so uncomfortable. And it's, something that you kind of get used to after a while. You're like, well, shit, I haven't been hit by the last 12. Lucky number 13 probably won't hit me either. And that was pretty much true, except for one day. There was a Soviet-era 107, so 107 millimeter rocket that was fired, and it landed pretty close to dead center in the base at Fob Ghazni. And turns out I was like 15 meters from it. I was in, basically they had a little intel cell there, and it didn't go off. It's a Soviet era. I don't know if the fuse malfunction or the explosive part of that 107 didn't go off, but I don't know, it didn't go off. It just buried itself in the ground, and there's this kind of smoldering, hole in the ground, and that's all you could see. The blast radius on that thing's like 15 meters. And so being at 15 meters away, I was close, if not inside the blast radius. And honestly, if that thing had gone off, it's hard to say. Maybe I wouldn't be here today. It's just one of those things where, I got a buddy who, he was actually on that same deployment. They were out, and some Taliban dude fired an RPG at him. And he was in the turret of the Humvee, and it went right over his head. He ducked down, and it went right over him. And, it's just one of those things where it's like, hey, it's a close miss. And, I just thank God that nothing happened, nothing worse happened. So at any rate, at that FDS, pretty similar stuff happened. You get detainees. The information was a lot fresher, a lot more, a lot closer to real time, talking like hours or a day versus days to weeks. And that the field detention site is one of the things that happens there is the determination is our determination is made on, hey, is this guy someone we should keep? Does this guy have intelligence value that needs to be exploited? Do we need to send him to the big interrogation facility? Or is this guy literally just a dirt farmer, wrong place, wrong time? He got rolled up with, other people, and he shouldn't have been arrested, and we're going to release him. Those are kind of the two primary functions of a field detention site: is extracting actionable information of intelligence value that can be turned back around for targeting or force protection or whatever. Number one, and then number two, making the determination on whether someone should be kept long term or not and sent up to the BTIF. So that was pretty much my first deployment. I spent from 2006 into 2007 there, about 10 or 11 months, somewhere around there. That's really about it. I mean, I'm sure lots of other stuff happened. I didn't keep a journal or a diary or anything. Maybe I should. Maybe I can just record these podcasts and kind of have that be, some level of recollection. At any rate, that was deployment number one for me. I had probably like a year, I think like a year and a half until my Iraq deployment. So I spent 08, 09 in Iraq. We'll talk about that on a future episode. And then I came out, I got into contracting. I was an intelligence contractor, And then 7 months later, after getting back from Iraq, I went back to Afghanistan for 18 months. And, we'll talk about that deployment as well. So 3 deployments, a little over 3 years, right? A little under 3.5 years in Iraq and Afghanistan. Listen, that's going to do it for this week's Tac Intel Tuesday. If you have any questions, be sure to put them down in the chat or in the comments below. You can send me a message on social media, just Gray Zone Intel. It's Gray with an A, Gray Zone Intel. I'm pretty active on Twitter and a little less active on Instagram. But shoot me a question there, and I will. Maybe we can do a Gray Zone or a Tac Intel Q&A for the next session. And by the way, I was just wondering about this earlier today because I've been working on this Area Intelligence Workshop, which is the online version of the one-day course. And I thought, how many people in preparedness, how many people are spending hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands or more dollars on preparedness, preparing for some future catastrophic scenario, and have also not done a threat assessment? Because it seems to me like you should do a threat assessment before you go and spend tens of thousands of dollars on preparedness. If you have not done a threat assessment and you want a very expedient way of doing a threat assessment, go over to areaintelligence.com. I have a 15-minute threat assessment guide. I'll send it to you for free. There's also a link to download that. It's 2 exercises. It's 2 threat assessment exercises. That will be the best 15 minutes you spend on pre-disaster intelligence. One of the biggest questions I get, one of the most frequent questions I get is, Mike, what should I be preparing for? Well, do a threat assessment. That's going to tell you exactly what you should be preparing for. That's going to hit all your major threats and hazards if you do those 2 exercises. And then as a part of the assessment, you're also going to be prioritizing them to figure out which you should focus on first. areaintelligence.com. I'll send you the guide for free. There's also some other stuff I'll send you in there. And with that, everyone, thanks so much for the support. I will be back next Tuesday for another episode of Tac Intel Tuesday. Until then, send me your questions or send me what you want to learn. If you say, hey, Mike, talk to me more about open source, or talk to me more about ISR, how to do an ISR plan, how to do X, Y, or Z. Let me know in the comments, and we'll get around to doing that because I like doing this. I like talking about this stuff and teaching about this stuff. It really is my life's work at this point. And really, I want people to learn and then implement this stuff because, frankly, that is what it's going to take. All right, so that's going to do it. Thanks, everyone, for watching, and I will be back next Tuesday. Until then, be well and stay out front.